This lecture will be on so-called scientific historiography. So, one thing we have to stress about, we're focusing here on the 19th century. At the beginning of the 19th century, the writing of history was something done typically by self-taught historians. For example, the people we talked about, David Hume, Catherine McCulloch, Edward Gibbon, they were not trained specifically as historians. They were smart people. They had been educated. They were all elites. But they were not trained so much as historians. That's the beginning of the 19th century. By the end of the 19th century, being a historian became a profession. And typically, to be considered to be a member of that profession, you needed a university education. Right? If you want to become a historian, you need a university education in the field of history. And increasingly, history became something that was taught at the university level. Moreover, there were an increasing number of historical associations and historical journals. And before this time period, there weren't a lot of those things. There were some. But their numbers are increasing. That's very important because historians, like scientists, are a community. Right? We work together to come to a better understanding of our field. And it's important to note that during this time period, there was a very strong belief that history could be scientific. That, in a sense, the laws that govern human behavior could be discovered. Right? Hadn't Adam Smith discovered the laws that conditioned human economic behavior? Well, can't we also discover the laws that govern how human beings behave in history? So there's this understanding among many historians that history could become something like biology or chemistry, where we could develop an understanding of laws that shape human action. Increasingly also, we saw this before, I want to stress this isn't something new, it's just something that's increasing, is there's a focus on the history of nation states. And you can see how this impacts how we teach today. I mean, if you look at a lot of the courses I teach, history of China, history of Korea, history of Japan, United States history is big. We tend to focus on the history of nation states. A lot of this comes out of this time period. Now, so far we've focused a lot on the importance of England, and we'll continue to talk, we talked about Germany, we'll continue to talk about Germany today, but here we're going to talk about the French, especially the important role of the French Revolution, to help us understand the role the nation state played in the development of history. First of all, in the French Revolution, the focus of history tended to be oftentimes the people. They might be treated as a force, as a anonymous mob of people, though that's maybe too harsh, but they are the agents of history. Or at least they have more agency than they had in the past. You can also write a history of the French Revolution that focuses on people like Robespierre and Danton and those people. But the idea is that in the French Revolution, it's not a history of simply there was this prince and he fought this other prince for this reason. This is a history in which, for example, the women of France, poor women of France marching on the Versailles the palace at Versailles, and taking possession of the King of France, Louis XVI, they matter. Right? This mob, or perhaps more generously, just this group of women, shaped history. So increasingly, there's this idea that people, just common people, are the agents of history, that their collective action can shape. And what defines a people is what national community they are a part of. It's not so much their religion that's important. It's their membership in the nation defined culturally and linguistically. So it's the French people who are the ones, the prime movers in the French Revolution. So it's not a focus on religion, for example. The focus is on belonging to a national community. And you can see this reflected if you've ever watched like a movie about the French Revolution. The leaders would often call each other citizen. Before the French Revolution, you were a subject to the king. right? You were subject, you were below the king. But now there's this idea that you're a citizen with rights, such as the rights of man. They're on the right there. I didn't intend that pun. It just came out, right? Citizen, rights of man on the right. You're now a citizen. You're not supposed to just sit there and pay your taxes and just obey the king like a subject. You're supposed to be actively engaged in the historical development of your nation. And as a citizen, you have these rights to help you do that. There was also a shift. So it's a little bit complicated. The French Revolution, they got rid of the king, like they killed him. But after the French Revolution was over, a king was restored. But what's interesting is, whereas previously the king had been called the King of France, he was now called King of the French. You may say, well, why is that different? King of France focuses on geography. It doesn't say anything about the people that are being governed. It focuses on geography, and it kind of treats the country as if it was the possession of the king. But when you say the King of France, or I'm sorry, the King of the French, the focus is on that national community of which the king is a head. So increasingly the focus of history is on these citizens, not on important kings, and on the national community. The history of the American people, the history of the French people. And you can see how this is a bit different from what we have seen so far, right? Even people like David Hume and Catherine McCulloch tended to focus on big, important people. And now it's saying, no, we need to focus on the people. The people may remain anonymous. It's not like they're writing biographies of poor peasant women, but they are taking peasant women when they act as a group seriously and treating them as if they're French. Now, one thing that the people in the French Revolution tried to do, and I tried to show that through this very interesting image. There's the Declaration of the Rights of Man. There is an angel and this woman here, and there's God looking down, and there's this kind of idea that this is the what God wants, this new thing. There's this question, is a clean break from history possible? The radical revolutionaries during the French Revolution thought it was possible. They tried to completely remake France. For example, they tried to move from a 7-day work week based around Sunday, a Christian kind of idea, right? 7 days, day of rest on Sunday. They tried to change to a 10-day calendar with still only 1 day of rest. So peasants didn't, and workers didn't much like it because they had to work 9 days before they got a day off instead of just 6. But there was this idea, let's have a clean break from history. This man right here, Edmund Burke, wrote a very famous book called The Reflections on the Revolution in France. And notice he did it, the French Revolution begins in 1789. He does it very early. So he does it before things got really crazy, and he's critical of this idea that we can make a clean break from history. He says that's impossible. And he writes, even seemingly irrational institutions and patterns of conduct handed down from the past reflected an accumulation of practical experience that made them a better guide for the present than rational maxims. So what he's saying, in a sense, is that people have their own character and they develop historically. And though their traditions and the institutions based on those traditions might seem odd, it's actually better than simply just trying to change everything all at once, because there's probably something behind those ideas. And there's a person, an author I like, he tried to write history, he has some problems with it, but named G.K. Chesterton, and he has a famous, he was very good at coming up with witty sayings, and he said, don't take a fence down until you know why somebody put it up. And Edmund Burke essentially saw the French revolutionaries doing that. They're trying to change everything without really understanding how there's an organic continuity between the past and the present. By the way, this is why Edmund Burke is considered the father, in a sense, of modern conservatism. It's not that he didn't believe things could change, but he thought you should have reform. You shouldn't have radical revolution, right? Allow these cultures and traditions to change and develop on their own rather than trying to change them. And in a sense, there's something to what he's saying, because after he writes his criticism of the French Revolution, things get really nasty. I talk about this in History 122, which many of you have taken, but you no doubt know of Robespierre and the terror in which, in the name of building this new republic, of a clean break from history, of trying to bring France into accordance with the rights of man, Robespierre and his colleagues kill about 40,000 people. in what's called the Terror. So there's this kind of understanding, maybe from Edmund Burke's perspective, okay, we can't have a clean break from history. That continues on. Now, Robespierre eventually, of course, will not only, and I'm sorry, this image back here is of Louis XVI being executed. That's how they tried to make a clean break from history. We'll kill the king. Now, Robespierre himself would be executed. He went too far. And what will happen is a general, a man named Napoleon Bonaparte, will use his army to seize power, and many French people will welcome him to power because it means an end to all this slaughter, to all this killing. Or at least the killing of French people killing French people, because Napoleon's going to go out and invade. He invades a bunch of other countries, right? So they're going to move from the French people killing each other to killing other people from other countries. And as he does this, he tries to spread his revised understandings of the revolution, of an idea of enlightened government based on human reason. So what happens is France is going to go out and invade other countries to spread its idea of a revolution. And what's interesting is even though they understand themselves as spreading universal values, ideas of the rule of law, of equality before the law, those are things Napoleon believed in, they also said it's the French national duty to do so because we're just so advanced, we're so civilized, that we as the particular French nation can spread these universal values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And like I said, the rule of law and equality before the law. Now, other countries would respond by adopting some of these ideas. There were people in other countries who were sympathetic to French understandings of enlightenment, of the rights of man, of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and all those things. But other times they will also adopt nationalism and want to assert their own independence. In other words, they really like a lot of ideas from the French, but they don't want to be ruled by the French. And one of those people are the Germans. Remember, the Germans don't have their own unified state, but there are people who consider themselves German. And as they get beaten up by France, they're going to have a growing desire for unification. Right? We Germans are divided. That's why the French can come in and conquer us and beat us up. We need to unify as Germans so we can be strong.